Well, inherent in today's service is the assumption that we are all growing up, that whether we are 98 or 9 or 8, we have some growing up to do. That's just what life is like. Growing up is hard work, and it's a lifelong pursuit. Because the path to maturity has no end. It's wise to focus not on the outcome of maturity, but in the journeying itself. Because along the way, as we become emotionally healthy adults, we see that there's a profound awareness of that journey that we are on. The realization is an indispensable ally in weathering the ups and downs, the roller coasters of life. It is true that growing up means that we will see the world in more global ways, that we can understand choices less as short-term gains and more as long-term consequences, that we can understand love better and selflessness better without losing who we are. When I say we are the ones who need growing up, I don't mean everyone who's over 20 in this room. I mean all of us. I mean all of us have maturity to take on, especially spiritual maturity. I have said it many times that I know some 7-year-olds that are more mature than 70-year-olds. And that is true. It's a hard time to grow up, for sure, though, in this period of time. Unlike other times during war and chaos, the children or the young people here in front of me are growing up in a particularly odd time in our lives, in the lives of this society. Overloaded with information, comparisons, ratings, leaders of countries who seem to lack maturity, undignified behavior becoming common among us. Hatred and anxiety is expressed throughout the world by people who should know better. It's a hard time to grow up because everything we say and do is rated and ranked by complete strangers. Our statements feel less free in a world of self-appointed monitors and what is right and wrong. The more we feel connected, the more we feel alone. What a strange time to be coming of age or to be moving on into a new chapter of life. So how do you grow up in that kind of climate? It's probably not that different from any other climate. There's old advice that your parents gave you. You have to learn how to make your bed or take care of your finances. Some people in this room haven't learned either of those yet. There's enough advice to go around on how to learn and mature in our lives. You can probably Google 1,000 things that'll tell you about how to mature. I think there's a reason for that. It's because life in some ways is infinite. There are no limits to learning, to becoming, to bettering ourselves, to healing hurts, to expressing joy, to taking hold of our past, to forgiving others. There is no end to such work. A retiring minister friend of mine said to me years ago, the thing I learned, he said, the thing I learned in the ministry was to love. That took me aback because my assumption was that as a minister, he came in knowing how to do that. But in hearing his words, I assumed maybe he became a minister so he could learn to love. He said, I learned to love my congregation. What a gift that was to me. I remember those words every day. And I've thought about the things that I have learned here as a minister of this church, as these young people have grown up here in our midst. And I've been thinking about what I am learning as I prepare for my sabbatical that starts in mid-June, as I am also, in a sense, going off to college, like some of the young people here, as I go as a resident fellow to Harvard Divinity School. I've been thinking about what I have learned here and what I need to learn. I know that I have learned to lead more from the back of the parade, empowering leaders as our campaigns to make this church better and to make the world better march forward. I have learned to let go of outcomes I can't influence. I have learned more every day about my privilege as a white, cisgendered, hetero male in our society. I have learned that showing up once to a meeting doesn't mean you're committed to that group. And I have learned to listen more deeply. Oddly enough, like the minister who learned to love, this has been part of my calling, to learn to listen, to be present, and to let the world speak. And I am always learning that the holy is far more vast than I am. In a way, I am continually learning to love my God. In transitions of life and coming of age and going to college and new work and having a child and growing old and retirement and dying, we ask ourselves, what are we learning as a part to become more present and to become more honest with who we are and what the quality of our souls is? In all transitions, I think two things can be worked on by people of faith. The first is that we seek to grow a spirit. We actively seek to grow our spiritual lives. That means we pay attention to the intangible. We practice sitting quietly, pondering what we do not know, listening for instructions. There's a biblical character when I think about growing up and doing that growing of spirit that I always go to, and that is Samuel. Do you know Samuel? He was an above-average young boy who went to work in the temple. He had great SAT scores. He was always looked to as a model child. And he went to work in the temple, and one night he was trying to sleep, and he kept hearing, "Samuel, Samuel." And he went into the other room. He said, "What? I'm here." And they said, "Go back to bed." So he went back to bed, and he heard, "Samuel, Samuel." And he got up, and he ran to the other room. He said, "What?" And they said, "Go back to bed. We didn't call you." Then he realized it was God was speaking to him. "Samuel, be my servant." Samuel then went on to find David and anoint David as the king of Israel. Samuel went on to do great things because he learned to attend to hearing things that were holy, not just things that were mundane. Walter Brueggemann wrote a poem about that moment in the biblical story. He said, "We are surrounded by a din of demanding voices, selling, recruiting, seducing, coercing. We screen them out in order to maintain our sanity, to secure our rest. And then in the night you address us. You call us by name. You entrust us risky words. You empower us with authority. But your voice is on first hearing, not distinctive." Brueggemann's reminding us that there are so many voices that are demanding our attention that are less than holy, that don't demand a deep spiritual response to the world. But when we can quiet the world, when we can quiet ourselves, we can have a conversation with God or the holy. And that's important. That's important work to grow a spirit, to mature spiritually as human beings. The New Testament says to grow spiritually, or to grow into salvation, we have to put away malice and guile and insincerity and envy and slander and long for a spiritual milk, it says in the first letter of Peter. That by it you may grow up to salvation, it says. I I think this means if we'd spend our time chasing money and fame and recognition, listening to those words of coercion and seduction, that we fail to meet an opportunity of deep salvation, not some salvation that comes by us assenting to belief, but the kind that comes in the form of humbly seeing that we are part of, not apart from others. The kind that sees our lives as longing for peace, not prosperity. The kind that sees that we are the heart and soul of whatever community we are in. And to spend time slandering and envying and lying with insincerity is to make believe that none of what we do in our lives matters. To grow a spirit is to be able to sit quietly and converse with the deepest parts of ourselves and with our God. And secondly, it means that we find a depth in our kindness. There's a story of Henry James, the 19th century literary realist. He was the brother of William James, for those of you paying attention to 19th century history. He was saying goodbye to his nephew Billy, who was going off to college. And he said, there are 3 things that are important in human life. The first is to be kind. The second is to be kind. And the third is to be kind. Kindness is one of those doors to holiness that we often set aside, we often think is just something that we can do without. It means we have to start with being kind to ourselves, kind to others, to be present to them, to have a hunger within us to see and to hear another, knowing that each of us has a hunger to be seen and heard. We have to be kind in our communities and to our nation, even when our nation goes on tilt. Frederick Buechner said, remember, New Haven, New Hope, and Salem, or Shalom, are names not just of our oldest towns, but of our holiest dreams, which most of the time are threatened by the madness of no enemy without, as dangerous as they are, threatened by our own madness within. Kindness can't be underappreciated, or can be underappreciated as a quality to growth. Today I memorialize a man later this afternoon who died at almost 90. For all his quirks and fears of the world he grew up in, the one overriding quality came through everything I learned about him, and that was that he was kind. Never malicious, always kind. I am convinced after hundreds and hundreds of memorials that there is no better compliment that can be given to any one of us at the end of our days. So this sermon is about growing up. It's not just for the young people here or the coming of age youth. It's for all of us. Growing up never ends. It's a never-ending process. It is our spiritual task to lend our days to growing a spirit, to finding kindness within ourselves and for our world, so that we might grow up to salvation, that we might lean in to the call of God and the urgency of love. That is the spiritual task for each of us, not just if you're 15 or 18, but for all of us. May your growth continue today and in future days. Amen and amen.